the shadows of the ongoing war, a chilling accusation emerges. The United Nations, through its special committee, has leveled charges of genocide against Israel in its Gaza campaign. As the world watches in horror, evidence mounts of deliberate starvation and life-threatening conditions imposed on Palestinians. This grave allegation sent shockwaves through the international community, jeopardizing Israel's diplomatic ties and raising questions about accountability. The European Union contemplates suspending political dialogue while calls for war crimes investigations grow louder. A story of human tragedy, political turmoil, and the quest for ceasefire. Welcome to In Depth. A UN Special Committee has stated that Israel policies in Gaza could be considered genocidal, citing concerns over the starvation as a weapon of war and an apartheid system in the West Bank. The Guardian reported that the UN Committee annual report raised alarms over the mass killing of civilians in Gaza and life-threatening conditions caused by restrictions on food, water and fuel. The committee accused Israel of using basic necessities for political and military objectives. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, is investigating these claims, ordering Israel to take interim measures to prevent genocide. Israel has rejected the ICJ's ruling and criticized the UN's perceived bias against the country. And for more analysis, we're joined by Ambassador Haytham Abu Saeed, head of the International Human Rights Council mission to the United Nations from Geneva. And we are joined by Mr. Meher Nicholas Ferzali, Director of European Asian Center for Strategic Studies from Rio de Janeiro. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Thank you so much. And Ambassador Abu Saeed, how do the key legal definitions of genocide and war crimes apply to the allegations against Israel regarding its actions and aggressions in Gaza? Right, until we get back to Ambassador Abu Saeed, Mr. Ferzali, how does the UN Special Committee's genocide assessment of Gaza, can it be compared to the past, dealing with other conflicts in the past?
I'm delighted to join you today. The reason I'm in Rio is because the G20 summit will start tomorrow night in Rio de Janeiro. And of course, the situation in the Middle East will be top of the agenda. To come back to your question, it's a very good question. Things are complicated. So labeling, so we should beware of labeling. So that report was submitted indeed by the UN Secretary General practically 2 months ago in New York. And if you read the title of the report, is very impressive because it has the UN logo and it says United Nations Human Rights Report on the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. And it's quite severe with Israel. But the problem with the title says a lot. What does it mean, including East Jerusalem? They are using the United Nations One of the factors is Trump, but there are multiple factors: the end of the Cold War, the fact that during the Cold War, the Soviet Russia backed the Arab world, etc. Things changed a lot. And so now, when you say including occupied East Jerusalem with a UN stamp, many countries will actually react negatively or just ignore. So, for example, the US, so officially, for example, today the US has moved its embassy to East Jerusalem, and in 2 months, Trump will be in the White House. And these guys, for example, for them, East Jerusalem is not an occupied territory. Something else which is interesting in that UN report is the Secretary General of the UN has a beautiful job title, but in reality, he has no much power. So he submitted that report to the Security Council of the UN. And of course, there are 5 nations who have an incommensurate, huge say. So it's not like a democratic representation of the world community at large, where people in Africa and Asia and Latin America would have an equal say. It is 5 countries who control the Security Council because of their veto power and their permanent seats. Who are they? The United States, Britain, clearly France, Britain, and the United States are leaning to varying degrees, but they're leaning towards the Israeli worldview. So they view what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank and even South Lebanon with the perspective of the Israelis. That's 3 out of 5. The 2 others are Russia and China. China has huge economic and financial interest in Israel, including in ports and airports, where Chinese-owned state companies have billions of dollars of investment. So even though their heart may be bleeding for Palestinian civilians, it's not like they will, use their veto power or something. And even Russia has ambiguous relations with Israel, ambiguous at best. So let's be realistic. I think, sadly, the Arab and Muslim world should view things realistically. As long as Washington, D.C., Paris, London, and the European Union don't shift their policy, don't have a more neutral stance on the Arab-Israeli conflict, sadly, things will not change.
Sadly, things would not change for the time being, but we're speaking about interest-wise. Let me here go to Ambassador Abu Saeed. How do the key legal definitions of genocide and war crimes apply to the allegations against Israel with regards to its actions in Gaza and with regard to what was submitted to the ICJ?
Well, first of all, I was trying to say that we do not agree with the terminology you use on the alleged genocide, as genocide and ethnic cleansing are clear in the performance and the methodology used by the Israeli army on the battlefield. The evidence presented on this matter is enough to condemn Israel for generations and to impose huge compensation for its crime that has been committed for decades now.
No, Ambassador Abu Saeed, let me just take this clear. I'm sorry. So you here dismiss the word genocide, or you do not agree with this terminology?
No, I do not agree, because you said alleged genocide. It's not an alleged
so
genocide.
You're against alleged?
Yes, I'm against the terminology you use.
Please
the
continue.
Alleged.
Continue,
okay?
Please. Yes.
So I was saying that, therefore, I think we should start to impose some huge compensation for the Israeli crime that has been committed for decades by now. And still, they're still going on with it. So, in fact, yesterday we have learned that the Israeli government began preparing plans to empty the West Bank and to control it, fully control it, which means that it is a clear and a daylight violation of the 1967 agreement that Israel occupied, and which, according to the international resolutions, it is required to immediately exit from the settlement and to stop all their military activities. and settlement buildings. So we think that the genocide fact, it is a must, it is a fact, and must be solved within the international norms and within the international laws.
Ambassador Abu Saeed, again, what could be the legal consequences for or applied on Israeli officials if it was proved that it was made intentionally, or or intentionally caused the mass civilian casualties and the life-threatening conditions, according definitely to the UN Special Committee's report?
Yeah, there are two international courts, I believe, that have issued their verdict on Israel. The International Criminal Court, which issued an arrest warrant against Israeli leaders and Hamas as well. And I'm not sure how much have been left from the Hamas leaders under this issue. Yes, and this must be implemented sooner or later. I mean, whether they agree or not, it's going to be implemented. The International Court of Justice has called on Israel to apply on the international law to prevent the genocide and ethnic cleansing so that it is carrying out in Gaza, which will then enable the affected parties, in this case, to resort to compensation, which is not an easy task. We know that, as competent parties have begun, but I mean, we have some competent parties that have begun to estimate the human and freedom losses to be ready when the war stops. These measures are necessary to restore international peace and security, and we believe to weld any subsequent attempt by any parties from now on.
Mr. Fazeli, you spoke about the difficult situation of applying any measures on Israel. From your point of view, how might the EU's proposals or proposes suspending Israel dialogue with Israel affect diplomatic efforts on Gaza, and what alternatives might they consider? Hello. Hello.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So again, let me.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So again, Mr.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Great. I was saying, sadly.
So again, shall I repeat the question? Now, how might Mr. Fazeri, are you with me? Right. Going.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Right. So let me ask you, how might the EU's border proposals by suspending Israel dialogue with Israel affect the diplomatic efforts on Gaza, and are there any kind of other alternatives that might be considered?
Once again, very sadly, the short answer is no, because that political dialogue with Israel is highly symbolic. So it's not something very meaningful, tangible. Also, the new European Union foreign minister, her name is Kaja Kallas. She's a right-wing Estonian friend of the Likud party, and she will be confirmed as the next European Union foreign minister in the coming days. She's very much pro-Israel, and she will control the all-powerful external affairs foreign ministry of the European Union in Europe and in Brussels. So of course, she will do everything in her power to protect Israel. One more thing, that political dialogue is symbolic. It's good to have, but it's not a recourse. So in law, there's something very strong. It's a French word used in English law and in law, recourse. What does it mean, recourse? If you are the victim of a crime, including a war crime, you are a poor civilian in Gaza or the West Bank, you need to rely on someone powerful, the king, the emir, the king, the prince, the government. Someone powerful can do justice. So you go to the king or the government. And he will.
Let me here ask you about this. What does the terminology suspending dialogue with Israel mean in this case?
These are empty words. So sadly, they're empty words because political dialogue, it's about foreign ministers meeting over a nice dinner with wine and fine foods in Brussels or Tel Aviv. It's meaningless. So what's important is trade. Are the European Union leaders embryonically considering potentially slapping trade and economic sanctions on Israel? Of course not. So there's no recourse. So basically, these guys in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, they want justice. So they want a recourse. And actually, the European Union, especially under the new EU government led by Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas, of course, they have no recourse to offer to the Palestinian civilians.
Mm-hmm. Before we dive deeper into our discussion, let's take a moment to examine U.S. condemns Israeli Gaza aggression. Stay tuned. Right, welcome back. And back to you, Mr. Fazali. And let me here ask you, you spoke about the inability of of Europe to apply the report of the committee. Now, what legal and diplomatic implications could arise then from the UN reports if there is inability to apply it or to comply, or to pressure Israel to comply with it?
Quite honestly, I don't think there will be legal implications for Israel, not big ones. Why not big ones? Because that international system, what we call the United Nations, was built after the Second World War. One of the reasons why they created the UN right after the Second World War was to avoid war crimes. And it's very idealistic. It is based on ideas we call in legal philosophy Kantian. So very beautiful Kantian ideas about justice, humanism, etc. But in reality, beyond the United Nations Charter and Kantian philosophy, which are beautiful, there is the cold reality of superpower rivalry. So in reality, if there isn't a minimum of agreement between America, the European Union, Russia, and China, nothing will happen because of that incommensurate veto power they have, which is a huge veto power. Some people say that they should not have it. Some people say that Egypt or India should have a seat. Brazil should have a seat at the UN Security Council permanently, but we are not there yet. And until the global South, until nations, big nations like Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Brazil, don't have a voice at least equal to France or Britain, nothing will happen, because beyond these reports about human rights and beyond this moral condemnation, to have a real recourse, so to slap on sanctions, to do something tangible, to sway, to force the hand of Israel, for example, you need to have that superpower agreement. And in the current circumstances of a new Cold War, there's a new Cold War starting now, pitting Washington against Beijing. It's difficult to see them agree on anything, because the logic now is clearly a logic of a new Cold War. And those who are caught in the crossfire are the small countries. They are the innocent civilians in Khan Yunus or Saida or Sur. they are caught in the crossfire of that new Cold War, sadly.
Ambassador Abu Saeed, as you heard Dr. Fazali, and we're speaking about the inability of the international community to apply anything, as he said, then what could be the prospects for accountability for Gaza crimes victims, given the current geopolitical landscape and the responses from powers like the US and other veto-wielding powers?
Yes, I think that the guest was talking about the binding instrument, I believe. Now, the binding instrument is under debate today within in the corridors of the United Nations. And this is why we are having these working groups going on today on all the resolutions that we are going back to it to try to amend some of it in order to reach a certain UN reforms on these actions. This is why we believe that the UN Security Council, it is the main problem with the whole UN bodies. The others are working comfortably. They are working within the laws. They are working within the rules and the norms of what has been written in these resolutions. But the problem is with the UN Council. I believe that the political aspect of the UN Council should be resolved by removing international humanitarian laws and the human rights laws from all these conflicts that is going on. And this is the debate that I believe that the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, along with all the human rights bodies, are carrying today to prevent all the parties to the conflict that should trust that no one, including their opponents, to misuse the emblem in order to preserve their symbolism of neutrality and protection. And also,
what do you mean exactly by removing?
We are talking about.
We're speaking about the Charter of the UN. We're speaking about.
No. I'm talking about the veto, because this is the main problem within the United Nations Security Council.
So you're speaking here about reforming the UN Security Council?
Well, we have to start with the UN Security Council, because the other bodies, as I said, they are moving ahead with all the work they're doing. And we don't have a main problems with all the other bodies. But the main problem is with the United Nations Security Council, because it's a political platform. And all they deal with is politics, according to the economical and interest, if you want. I'm not going to say a personal interest, but at least we have economical interests among states. And these are the problems that is imposing on the humanitarian portfolio. This is why I'm saying that most of these issues should be resolved with the Security Council.
Clear.
And this is the war that we
Clear.
are carrying today. Okay.
Yes. It's very clear here. Ambassador Haitham Abu Saeed, head of the International Human Rights Council mission to the United Nations from Geneva, and Mr. Meher Nicholas Fazali, an international affairs expert from the Rio de Janeiro. We thank you so much for your insights. And as global outcry grows over accusations of genocide in Gaza, urgent calls for international intervention and adherence to humanitarian law intensify, while EU divisions and Germany's opposition complicate diplomatic efforts. All this in the following report.
In an alarming report released yesterday, a UN Special Committee concluded that Israel's actions during the Gaza war align with characteristics of genocide. The committee accused Israel of employing starvation as a weapon of war, highlighting the systematic targeting of Palestinians as a group and the life-threatening conditions imposed upon them in Gaza.
This has led to increasing hunger, starvation, and now, as we have heard, potentially famine. We are witnessing acts reminiscent of the gravest international crimes.
The report paints a harrowing picture of human suffering, with nearly 70% of verified casualties being women and children. In light of these findings, Joseph Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, has proposed suspending political dialogue with Israel, citing concerns over potential human rights violations. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has reached catastrophic levels, with widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure and severe restrictions on aid. The UN committee pointed to the deliberate targeting of Palestinians and the imposed life-threatening conditions as evidence of potential genocide. This report stands as a stark reminder of the human toll of the conflict, underscoring the urgent need for international intervention to protect civilian lives and uphold international humanitarian law. In Germany, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock rejected Borrell's proposal, emphasizing the importance of preserving political dialogue to address compliance with international humanitarian law and facilitate aid delivery to Gaza. This stance reflects the complex dynamics within the EU regarding the Gaza war. As the world grapples with these disturbing findings, calls for immediate action to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza grows louder, underscoring the critical need for a peaceful resolution to the war.
Right, that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.